Um, so first of all, the roll towel that we're going to use today, if you don't have one, I think you all do, but just in case, it's just a hand towel rolled up with 3 rubber bands on either side. So you can go ahead and grab that for the spinal massaging that we're going to do. But first, to just kind of briefly review, since we're going to be working with the psoas today and the low back, the psoas is your deepest hip flexor, your deepest abdominal muscle. It runs on the front of your body, and it attaches on the front of your spine, and it comes down one on either side from the front of your spine down to your femur bones. So it attaches onto each of your lumbar vertebrae and T12 as well, your last thoracic vertebrae. It attaches onto the discs themselves as well. And then it travels down and joins with the iliacus muscle, which is on the inner rim of the hip bone, and then attaches onto the femur bone, right on the, like you have the ball and socket of your femur bone, it kind of attaches down here on a thing called the lesser trochanter. But its main function is to flex your body. When you bring your knees toward your chest, whether you're standing and bending forward or whether you're bringing your knees up to you, this is one of the main functions of the psoas, is to flex our body. And because of that, it's very much a muscle that's deeply involved in the nervous system. So a lot of our awareness of the psoas is under unconscious control in the autonomic nervous system. So when we have a stress response, a activation or an excitement in the nervous system that leans toward the fight or flight, the psoas muscle is one of the first muscles that kind of goes on guard and gets ready to contract. Because if you think about it, anything that we have to do to protect ourselves, whether it's a fighting stance, a running away, or a freezing and curling up, all of those things require the psoas to come into flexion, whether it's no matter what our response is to the stress response. So it's a very attuned muscle to the sympathetic nervous system. And because the sympathetic drive isn't always in our conscious control, this is part of the autonomic nervous system, we can have a lot of stress in the psoas without realizing it, without being aware. Like, your bicep gets sore after doing something and you feel it, but your psoas sometimes can get tight and cranky and we wonder why our back hurts, or, it can kind of come into more diffuse pain patterns, like in the hips and various places. So it's not always so clear, like, oh, my psoas, right? So it's also a very deep muscle in the body, which also makes, sometimes that makes it a little harder for us to access the knowing of what's going on. Because we have 2 psoases, one on each side, when one side gets tight and the other doesn't, we can have hip distortion. We can have a hip hike or a rotation, like a torsion of one side of the pelvis moving forward and one side moving back. And all of these things can affect it can affect everything, obviously in the pelvic bowl and in the low back and all this hip pain, things that we experience. The last thing that I'll say about it is that the psoas and the diaphragm share some similar attachment sites high up on the thoracic, T12, and the ligament for the diaphragm, the crura, attaches onto the lumbar spine as well. So there's a lot of speaking between the psoas and the diaphragm. So our breath pattern can very much impact our psoas, and our psoas can very much impact our breath pattern. So to know that this is also part of the wrapping up complex nature of our stress response and how we move the body. So today we're going to focus on releasing the psoas a little bit more than strengthening the psoas. We'll do a little bit of strengthening work, but really my goal, my hope for you is to find your psoas today and really befriend it and get to a place where you can hydrate and soften and lengthen. And then we'll see about some strength work. And of course, this is going to include some work for the low back too. So, all right, one last thing I'll say about the psoas. If you think of your body, if you think of your spine and looking at like the side of your body, if your spine is here, your psoas is the muscle in the front, and your quadratus lumborum is your deepest low back muscle. And I always think of those two muscles as like the spine is a baby tree. And you know how you see a baby tree that's staked down on two sides to help it stay sturdy while it's growing. Think of the psoas and the quadratus lumborum, those deepest muscles that are close to the spine on the front, the psoas, and the quadratus lumborum on the back, as those support structures for the spine. So it's a spinal stabilizer. It helps us stay upright when we're walking. Or when we're just standing. So there's a lot of stabilization of this muscle. So the low back is intricately connected to this. The QL and the psoas speak to each other, just like the psoas and the diaphragm speak to each other. Okay, so let's go ahead and sit up straight and tall and take a moment to close your eyes and know how you're sitting. Are you comfortable? Sometimes when we are sitting flat on the ground without support and our knees come high, we're already in some pretty deep flexion of the psoas muscle here. So give your pelvis some support by putting props underneath you, a bolster or a blanket, or something that lifts you up so that your knees are in line with the hip joints or lower. So take whatever support you need and then close your eyes. So let's first notice if we have a good base. You know, are you steady in your pelvic bowl? Do you have a feeling that you are in a good place where you're not tipped way back or tipped way forward, but you have a balance? Imagine, you know, that your pelvis is kind of like a bowl that supports the spine. And once you have that feeling of just the right spot of stability, let's come into your breath. Let's feel our way into whatever the breath is right now. And you don't have to change anything. So don't feel like you need to, you know, get the breath super long or manipulate it in any way. Just notice. So not only pay attention to just the feeling of the rising and falling tide of the breath, but get to know the diaphragm, feel into the diaphragm, the dome that it is. You know, it separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity with a few holes in it for vessels and things like that to move through. See if you can get a sense that the whole dome can move down. And the whole dome can move up. And if we are feeling that our diaphragm is kind of like an upside down bowl that can flatten and then rise, are there any sides to your bowl that you can't feel or feel a little stuck? Do you feel symmetrical or no? And try not to judge what you're experiencing. We're just moving into sensation. Perhaps you naturally reverse your breath where you feel when you inhale, your diaphragm rises up. So see if you can allow for the diaphragm to drop down on the inhale and for it to rise back up on the exhale. This next sensing will be easier when we're on our back, but let's just see if we can feel into the psoas muscles, wherever you're. And if you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, that's okay. See if you can just sense into let's find the very front of the spine. And then imagine these muscles, even if you don't have a physical sensation, have a visual in your mind, and put that visual into the body of imagining your psoas muscles on the front of your vertebrae, moving outward and downward toward the pelvis, crossing over the pelvis into the femur bones. And as you breathe, see if you can sense the changing shape of your pelvic bowl, of your low back, of your psoas themselves. This will be easier to feel when we're lying down, but just see what you can find. What do you feel? Place your palms at your heart. Let's bow into our practice. And even if you have no interest in sensing your psoas muscle, can you sense your breath and just let your practice be about a sense of release through the breathing? Or our hands. And we're going to start with the rolled towel. So if you just arrived, a hand towel with 3 rubber bands, 1 in the middle and 2 on the sides. Okay, so if you haven't done, most of you have done this with me before, but I'm just going to have a little description about what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to start with this rolled towel in between our shoulder blades, kind of high up, and we're going to travel down the whole back body to the sacrum. So there's going to be a few different techniques that you need to know to help you along the way here. So feet are on the floor, knees are bent. And we're going to just practice the rocking first before we add the arms into it. Now, a lot of times when we're not familiar with this, we tend to just rock our pelvis where we kind of anterior and posterior tilt the pelvis. So we want to keep the pelvis quiet. We want to have a nice neutral pelvis. So we're going to be pushing off of our feet to try to move our spine top, bottom. So like north, south in the body, we want to rock our body up and down, crown to tail. And once you get the feeling of that action, there's 3 different positions to do with the arms to mimic flexion, extension, and rotation of the spine. So remember, this is all subtle. So the first position with the arms is the hands, like I'm doing, right over your chest. So your arms are up in the air, soft. They don't have to be ramrod straight. And then the next position is you take those arms over your head. So you mimic extension in the body, all the while rocking. And then back to center. And then turn your head and your arms over to one side. And then back up and turn your arms and head over to the other side. So now you get to choose your pace. This is also the joy of doing your practice at your house. You could do this for the whole hour if you want to. Okay, so once you get back up to the flexion of the arms, then you can walk the bolster down your shoulder blades a little bit so you get to a new spot, and then repeat. So from what I've heard from a lot of people, the hardest part to get of this is to the way that you need to rock your body. So if your thighs start getting really tired, you're working too hard. Okay, so it should be fairly smooth and easy. Try to keep the pelvis as neutral as possible. So if the arms confuse you, then just stick with the rocking. That's the most important piece of this. So take your time, arms up over your chest and then over your head and then side to side, and then move to a lower spot. So we're just going to go down the spine like this. And now if you find, like right now, I'm finding a good spot. So I'm not moving. I want to stay here a little bit because it feels good. So I'm just going to stay, which is, maybe take me off pace with the rest of you, and that's okay. So if you find places that feel really good,
stay there and give yourself a little rocking and a little self massage. Now, the last component of this is your breath. So a lot of times when we have a lot of things to focus on, we tend to hold our breath. So if you know that you're a breath holder, pay attention to making sure that you're still breathing with a nice steady pace. All right, so we're just going to move down the spine with that blanket or towel underneath us, taking the 3 arm positions. Take your time. You don't have to rush through this. And you might find some spots that you really want to hang out in. Now, I know nobody's probably there yet, but I'm just going to say it ahead of time, just in case you're moving speedily through this. When you get to the lumbar spine, it starts to feel like nothing because of the natural curves in the back. So at that point, if you get to a place where you're like, oh, I don't feel the self-massage anymore, then you can bring your knees to your chest and just rock top, bottom, north, south with your knees at your chest for a couple of positions of the lumbar spine, and then put your feet back down when you get to your sacrum. And when you get down to the bottom of your sacrum, sometimes it's helpful to straighten your legs and just rock off your heels with legs on the ground. So hopefully this feels really nice to you. Stay inside the breath. This is a wonderful way to hydrate the discs, to give a lot of softness to all the soft tissues, the ligaments and tendons and the little muscles that are between your vertebrae. Make sure you're breathing. I find, I try to do this, at least once a week, twice a week. But I find that on the days when I don't feel well, where you're just kind of like, oh, I just don't have the energy for the standing poses, or on days when you're like, I'm not feeling well, my back hurts, or my breath is weird. These are some really good techniques to do to help you. All right, so wherever you are, just make sure you're slowly moving down the spine. Check in with your rocking, make sure your pelvis is nice and neutral and that it's not too hard on your thighs. You don't want to have too much work. You might notice when you get to where your diaphragm is, that's about where I am now. You might be way ahead of me, you might be way behind me, it doesn't matter. But you might find that this really is a good spot to start exploring your breathing, the origins of your breath. If you did find some, when we were exploring the dome of your diaphragm, if you did find some spots that were a little tight or a little snagged or a little absent, this might be a good opportunity for you to kind of work out some of those kinks. All right, so if you're, going much faster than me, just notice that. And if you feel like, oh, I'm already done, how come nobody else is done, or how come she's not done? Just go back to your favorite spot. Find a spot that is your favorite. I feel like I'm going faster than I normally do when I'm just doing this on my own. Usually when I do it on my own, it takes me about 20 minutes. 15, 20 minutes, but that's just the way I like it. You might be done in 7 minutes, 5 minutes, you might be done in 30 minutes. So there's no rules. There's only, the great thing about self-massage tools, all kinds of self-massage tools, is you get to just be where you are, and there's nobody to tell you to stop. Now we're moving on. There's nobody to tell you that you have to keep going. You just can follow the intuition. So now I'm a little bit in my low back now, and what I'm noticing is that I not only do I want to bring my knees to my chest and rock, but sometimes I like to rock side to side as well. So all is well. Whatever position feels comfortable for you is a good position. You're going to get some hydration and massage on those vertebrae no matter what. Now, the other thing I want to say is don't ever do this, please, with a foam roller. You want a small, soft thing if you're going to be moving along your spine like this. If you have a big foam roller, it's just a little too much. And you can't get into the subtle little nooks and crannies with a big foam roller, the same as a rolled towel as well. So foam rollers are awesome, and there's a time and a place for them, certainly a place in the body for them. But this is a different kind of thing we're doing here. So I'm just about at my sacrum. There's no rush if you are way ahead or way behind me. So I'm just reminding you that when you do get to your sacrum, it might feel good when you get lower on the sacrum, just straighten your legs and just rock off your heels on the ground. So remember, even at the sacrum, you may feel, oh, I don't need to do those arm positions anymore. But really, truly, even though the impact is less than when you are in your thoracic spine, the impact of flexion and extension and rotation is still there in your sacrum. So feel free to keep moving with the arm positions. All right, now you can ignore me if you, like I said, I felt like I went pretty quickly through it. So if you're taking your sweet time, awesome. But if at any point you are ready to be done, you can, if you feel like, oh, I really love that one spot and you want to go back to it, you can do that. Or when you are ready to join me, straighten your legs. And this is, I want the blanket kind of right under the sacrum, or not the blanket, but the rolled towel. And we're just gonna rock your straight legs are on the ground. Take your legs a little wider than your hips, and you're just gonna rock internal and external rotation. Don't do this for very long. We're gonna take that rolled towel out of there and repeat that. Okay, so I'm in the interest of having time to do more things. I'm going to end now, and you can keep going. You do not have to join me. You can keep doing you. But if you're ready to move on, knees to chest, have a little rocking side to side. All right, give a good squeeze, come into stillness. And then we're going to stretch our legs straight on the ground. Legs are wider than hips a little bit. And we're going to rock our whole leg, femur bone, shins, feet, internal and external rotation. So toes together, toes not together, but toes point to each other, and then point away. And see, I sometimes put my hands, my finger pads on my femur bones at the hip joint, so I can feel that this action is going all the way into the hip joint. Now, if for some reason the looseness of this is making your SI joint or your hip joint or your knee or your ankle feel unstable, then you can stop doing it. But if it feels good, just a couple more swings through. All right, then feet on the ground and rest for a moment in just constructive rest position. This is a great place to be neutral in the psoas muscles. If we were all together in class, I would have you help each other by pressing on your knees, standing over each other and pressing on your knees and pushing your femur bones into your hip joints. So imagine somebody is doing that for you. All right, and go ahead and roll over onto your side. Find your way into child's pose. Take the hips back toward the heels and walk the hands forward and maybe a little bit of inching Get into that rocking left to right a bit. And then a neutral place. Feel into the deep flexion in the pelvis, the knees. And then come up onto all fours. Roll the spine around. Instead of starting in cat-cows, let's start in other movements. So move the spine around in more fluidity. You can rock your hips from side to side or do some circles in the pelvis. Shoulders, neck, whatever feels good. And then move your way into a cat and a cow. Feeling especially that rounded spine after that back bending we did with the towel. All right, curl the toes under, settle your hips back toward the heels, open up the bottom of your feet. And then release that and find your way to dog pose. All right, so take your time here, pedaling your feet, one heel down, other heel down, just finding some bending of the knees so that you get the legs to open up. And then take the feet wide on the mat, turn the toes in a little bit, and feel all the space through your pelvis. As your hamstrings and calves start to stretch, also feel like the pelvic bowl is spacious, your breath can move deeply. Walk your feet back to a neutral place. Walk your feet forward, come into Uttanasana. Bend the knees a fair amount. Shake your hips left and right. Shake your head. Let things be easy. Inhale for a halfway lift. Get the spine to grow long. I'm putting my hands on blocks. You don't have to. You can, however you enjoy your practice. And then the exhale and melt again. Feel the flexion in your hips, the passive flexion through the psoas muscle. Inhale, halfway lift thigh bones. Move back, legs get straight, spine gets straight. Exhale and fold again. Drop your seat, rise up, coming up to stand. All right, so breathe your way here. Open chest, lean back a little bit. Big breaths, big cactus, open the chest, and then release your arms down. Shake out your hands. All right, so now feel into the weight of your feet, yield. Imagine that the heads of your femur bones, and you can bend your knees a teeny bit to find this. Let the heads of the femur bones drop back into the hip joints. Like you want to sit down, but you're not going to. So just a teeny bit of a bend in the hips. And then find your breath. So we're in like the most minutest chair pose that ever existed, like the littlest bit of flexion in your pelvis. Bring the arms up, feel the weight come into your legs. Start to engage the core a little bit more, a teeny bit more flexion in the pelvis, just a teeny bit more flexion in your hip joints. All right, and then stand up, exhale. And float forward, relax your neck. A halfway lift, melt again. Step back, come to a plank. Find that integrity in the center line of the body. Imagine those psoas muscles and quadratus lumborum and also your transverse abdominis wrapping around them. Everything hugging toward the spine to stabilize. And then put your knees down and find your way to the ground. Roll the shoulders a few times. Just feel that your shoulder blades glide on your rib cage. And then inhale, rise up, exhale, and melt down. All right, we're gonna do a couple of cobra poses a little differently. So get your blanket and we're going to have the blanket across the mat and underneath our pelvis. Let me show you from the side so you know kind of where to put it. And you can have this blanket on any height that feels good. If you want less height than this, that's fine. So we're gonna put the pelvis under our low belly, okay? And our thighs are down, so I can feel the edge of the blanket kind of right at my hip joint, okay, somewhere around there. All right, now from here, and you can adjust. So if you want to move the blanket a little further down, a little further up, find a place that's comfortable for your pelvis and your belly. Then we're going to take Sphinx pose with the arms. And a lot of times we feel a lot of strength in our bellies when we do some back bending, and that's good. But for right now, just see if you can relax just the teeniest bit more than that. Take a breath. And then we're going to take our arms, we're going to rest our belly down. This is awkward when you have something stuck under your belly. Take your arms out to the sides like a V, and we're going to rise up with a nice wide posture. Now you might experiment, see what it feels like to move the blanket an inch up or an inch down. Hopefully you just didn't have breakfast so that you're not compressing your abdomen too much. All right, so breathe well. You start to feel the psoas open a little bit. All right, rest. Now come and bring the pelvis on the blanket. So you might want to inch forward just a little bit more. So really, truly, the blanket is underneath your pelvis and not so much under your belly. Turn your head to one side and rest here. Now, breathe well and see if you can breathe into the psoas muscles. Now this is about where if I had a Gertie ball, if we all had those MR balls, I would have you do some work with them here to kind of get into massaging the psoas a little bit. But since we don't all have them, let's go ahead and find our way. You can come back to child's pose or just come onto all fours for a moment and find some spinal releasing. Breathing well. All right, come on to your back. Now we're just going to do the teeniest bit of psoas strengthening, and mostly for the goal of getting to know the psoas, where you can feel the flexion happen consciously, so that hopefully you can have a window into that autonomic nervous system. So feet are going to come down onto the ground. Find your breath here, constructive rest position. It's simple. We're going to first just imagine that you're going to pick your right foot up off the floor and bring your knee towards your chest. We're not going to do the movement yet. I want you to just imagine it. And you might have like the first impulse of that action, and pay attention to what happens in the front of your pelvis when you do this. Can you feel your psoas muscles on both sides activate when you prepare to lift that right leg off the ground? Okay? So just notice there's a pelvic torsion that automatically happens. We're going to stabilize the left foot down, and we're going to flex the right hip. So both sides are going to be doing different work, but work. So now we're going to slowly bring the knee up toward the chest, and then bring the foot back down. And you don't have to go very far. And now let's relax into neutral. And we're going to imagine the same thing on the second side. We're going to put a little extra weight in our right foot, a little hovering of less weight in our left foot as we imagine lifting that leg off the ground. So just obviously your glutes are going to kick in. There's a lot of muscles that support this, but see if you can feel into those psoas muscles. And then when you're ready, we're going to actually do the movement of lifting your left leg, knee bent, knee toward chest, grounding right foot, and then place that left foot down. Balance, constructive rest, everything softens. So hopefully just you're getting into kind of the subtlety of your psoas muscle. Let's try that one more time on the other side. Left foot grounds, right foot slowly starts to lift off the floor, go in super slow-mo. Feel the muscles in your deep core supporting this. Lower that right knee down. Pause between the two sides to find the balance, and then ground your right foot and lift the left knee. Now you might find that one side is a lot more aware in your consciousness than the other. You might have dominance, so just pay attention. All right, now we're going to pick this pace up now that we hopefully have found the muscles into our consciousness. And now we're going to lift the right knee and lower the foot. And lift the left knee and lower the foot. Now imagine walking. You know, you can understand why we relegate this muscle to the back burner of autonomic control. Because if we had to think about engaging this muscle every step we took, we would accomplish very little in our day, right? So let's be thankful for the autonomic nervous system. All right. Now you might notice that if you're not using your psoas muscle, you can pick this foot up with your back muscles, with your hip muscles, with your hamstrings, with your quads. There's so many muscles that are willing to take over if the psoas is sleepy. So let's keep the psoas wakeful. All right, bring your knees to your chest and rock a little bit. Now this one's a little bit more complicated. So if you want to go back to the first variation, you can. You can have your arms out to the sides or down wherever is comfortable. Have your knees a little closer to your chest than just over your pelvis if you need it to be a little easier. So if you have your knees right over your pelvis, this is a longer cantilever. So just find what's comfortable for your back. And we're going to tap the heel. Right heel comes down and then up. And then left heel comes down and then up. Now, when you slow it down and you slow the pace of the right heel going down to the ground, that's an eccentric contraction of the psoas and then a concentric contraction when you bring the knee back up. So it's important to have the muscle that breaks and the muscle that, speeds up. So these are two different types of contractions that our muscles can do. Eccentric is kind of staying slow and controlled on the descent, and a concentric contraction is just, shortening muscle fibers, contracting muscle fibers. All right, how's your breath? How's the rest of your body? Is your head heavy? Are you trying to take over with other muscles? Okay, let's just rest now in constructive rest position. Feet on the ground, knees bent, relax the spine. All right, let's roll over onto our side. And we're going to just do a little teeny bit more of kind of getting to know this muscle in strength before we do some extension work. So let's find our way up to stand, okay? And let's just kind of come on to our heels and our toes. It's a very different kind of practice. We haven't gone through flow. We haven't done a lot of standing poses. So just notice that. And that because we've been flexing the psoas, see if you have a desire, if you're feeling the need for flexion, if flexion is that coiling is a natural thing from after the work we've just done. Okay, we're going to stand on our right foot and we're going to slowly lift the left knee up and try to do that action from your psoas muscle and then lower that foot back down. Okay, now because we are so asymmetrical in a lot of our psoas movement, our walking, we have one that's extending and one that's flexing. So the psoas knows how to do one, like opposition to the other side. So, but just notice that that's pretty complex. Walking is pretty complex. I'm always amazed that a 1-year-old baby has already figured that out, right? Okay, so
After doing both sides, we're going to pause here for a moment in Tadasana. And we're going to come back to that baby chair pose. And you can have let's have our feet hip width apart. Baby chair pose. So drawing the femur bones back. And now imagine that what's happening, feel into what's happening deep in the psoas muscles. Okay? A little bit deeper flexion. A little bit deeper flexion. And bring your arms wherever you want them to be. Now notice you can let your belly totally fall and stick your butt out and rely on your legs and kind of take away some of that effort, but let's give the effort to the psoas. Let's see, strengthen through those deep hip flexors. Now bear extra weight into your right foot, and we're going to hover the left foot. Breathing well. And bear weight into the left. Hover with your right. Now, of course, your glutes are doing a lot of work and your hamstrings too, but feel into the psoas. Let that foot down, rise all the way up. Take a breath. Exhale and take your feet wide apart. All right, so a little different position. Turn your toes out, and we're going to notice the flexion of your hip joints when our knees are out to the sides. Okay, so find that little bit of goddess. You can kind of come up and down. Breathing. Stand on up. So turn your right foot. This will be the only standing pose we do. Okay, turn your right foot out. Now, for some people feel this better in Parsva. Let's do it in Parsva Konasana. I was going to do Virasana, but let's come into Parsva Konasana. So because we have the elbow here, we have a little feedback system. So imagine that you're trying, lift your heel up off the ground and just feel the pressure of your knee going up into your elbow or forearm, and then place that foot back down. Now imagine you're doing that same action, but from the psoas. Instead of lifting the heel, try to lift your femur bone with your psoas muscle on this side. Big breaths. Okay, let's turn it into Virabhadrasana. I lied. We're going to do two poses. And imagine you're trying to lift your femur bone without lifting your heel up off the ground. Like you're trying to levitate your whole femur. Breathing deeply. All right, stand on up. A lot of times when we come into standing poses, we focus so much on the grounding and the pushing downward that the action of the psoas can get lost a little bit. So anytime we're flexing the hip, and it gets more complicated when we're not flexing in the neutral plane. When we're flexing within abduction and external rotation, things get a little bit more complicated. So let's put our elbow on our knee, stretch your arm over, start with the heel. Just lift the heel so you can feel the femur bone lift up, and teach the psoas that that's the action. Or teach your mind to recognize that that's the action. All right, now put your heel down and try to lift the femur bone up into the elbow. Okay, so or into the forearm, and use your psoas. Use the flexion of your hip to do that action. Now you might notice one side, oh, I got that. And the other side, you're like, whoa, totally absent. Come on out and find your way into Virabhadrasana 2. So you might have one side that functions a little bit more consciously, a little bit more adeptly than the other. Can you imagine levitating your whole femur bone upward? Use this from the psoas. Feel it from the core. Find your breath. Relax your neck and shoulders. All right, and straighten your legs. Let's relax. Thigh bones press back, hands onto the ground or blocks. Passive flexion. Breathing well, open up the backs of the legs. Till your feet in.
And we're gonna come back down onto the ground. Bring your knees to your chest for a moment and relax. Find your breath. Okay, roll over onto your belly. You all have done this with me, but we're going to do it in a slightly different way. Move everything out of your way. Okay. All right, so we've done this we do this fair amount without moving, where we bring our left knee up toward our chest, cross the right arm over and open up. Okay. So we're going to do this, but we're going to add a little something to it. So we're going to come into the twist, and then we're going to come back around, find a wide cobra, and then to the other side. And I want you to feel that you can flow through this. Don't forget about the wide cobra. This will open the psoas. Feel it as fluidly as you can. Make sure you're breathing. We're not staying put, we're kind of moving through. All right, I want you to do the left side opening. Or with the right side, just make sure whatever side you started on, you finish on the other side. And then rest down onto your belly. Okay, sorry to make you come up and down. Let's go ahead and come up. This will be the last time coming up. Now, I don't have a chair in here. I'm going to use my furniture. You can use a chair, you can use a wall, you can use the edge of a couch, where you can use whatever piece of furniture you want to. We're going to stand on our right leg and bring your left leg up onto a piece of furniture. And we're just going to bring our knee into our chest. Now notice, a lot of times when we do postures like this, I tell you to keep the hip over the knee, over the ankle. I want you to move forward. Okay, so then while you're here, just keep your hands on your hips if you want. You can look up, you can reach up, whatever feels good, or just stretching through the hip flexors. Now, this is pretty high. That's pretty deep flexion of the one hip and extension of the other. So you can go lower, where you're in a much lower stance. Okay, so you find wherever your body can support. Okay, and when you're ready, go ahead and switch to the other side. Okay, other leg is up. We're coming into the stretch. Extend through the spine. Find your breath, whatever position you found. Opening up through the hip flexors. Psoas muscle gets a good stretch here. This is something simple. So if you take a little break during the day and do a couple of stretches, maybe add something like this in. Because we spend so much of our day in flexion, sitting in chairs, sitting in cars, curled up on our sides in our beds, we have a lot of flexion in our lives. So having that extension through the pelvis can be a really good thing. Okay, come down onto the ground. We do poses like that a lot when we're in lunges in the beginning of class, but what we just did takes us a little deeper into it. And this next one, the last stretch we'll do for the psoas, same thing. It takes us into a little deeper. So you might need to be very careful with this because your back may be a little vulnerable. So you can go lower. I'm going to put my pelvis on a bolster. Maybe you're on 2 blankets or 1 blanket. So you can stretch. Now you can also, if you want, put your heel into the wall, your foot into a wall. I'm not going to do that, but you can. And grab your knee. Now, if you can't reach, you can hold behind your thigh. If you can't reach, wrap a strap around your leg, because you may end up kind of here. That might be where the flexion ends. And that's a good place. Now, and a nice way to do this is at the edge of your, if you have a firm enough bed where you feel supported in your spine, if you do this at the edge of your bed, you can, the straight leg, you can let the knee bend on the edge of the bed, which will enhance the stretch even more. I have a massage table, obviously, at my house because I'm a massage therapist, but so sometimes I do that on my massage table, which it's very firm, which feels really nice. But if you have a way to do this on the edge of a deck or the edge, you know, whatever you have the edge of that you can bend that other knee. All right, so find your breathing. All right, then relax, change sides. Left knee and right leg comes long. You might notice that one side is a lot tighter than the other. And this is all really good information to pay attention to your dominance patterns. You know, in the standing poses, did you have one side that you could figure that lifting the femur bone up easily, and another side that you're like, well, I just can't feel anything, or I don't have control over that movement pattern? So this is common that we don't feel it or don't have control over it because the psoas muscle is so deeply entrenched in our unconscious movement patterns. Knees to your chest, relax for a moment. The last thing we're going to do before softening again is to have a bridge, and have it be a gentle bridge. So supported gentle bridge. You can stay on your bolster. You can come onto a block and have the block across your pelvis. So however you want to move into a supported bridge, I would recommend lower versus higher in the height. So that you're not overstretching. We're trying to just soften now instead of have a deep stretch. It's a nice neutral place. Allow some feeling of weight to come into the hip joints. Breathing well. Okay, so now that you've kind of balanced the two sides into symmetry, put your pelvis down. And you have some choices for Shavasana. So you can put your legs up a wall. That will put you into some passive flexion of the psoas muscles. You can be on your back and make a little bridge with blocks and a bolster or some blankets. And you can lie on your back and put your calves up. Well, I'm running out of space. You can put your calves up on that little ledge. Okay, so there's lots of ways for you to come into Shavasana. You can also put your legs up on a chair or a couch, your calves up on a chair or a couch. So whatever you're doing, try to get into a little bit of passive flexion in the hip joints. Okay. All right, so if you want to take your hands and massage just a little bit, you can take the heel of your hands right up against the heads of the femur bones and the hip joint, or into the inner rim of the pelvis, and just kind of relax the psoas muscles. If you want to do some rocking like we did in the beginning, where you kind of spin your legs in and out to loosen. So prepare for your version of Shavasana, whatever way feels best to you. Now, if you have a sandbag, you can put a sandbag on your pelvis or on the femur bones. So whatever you're choosing, imagine that there's just so much incredible ease through the psoas muscles, where there's this sense of deep surrender and softness. And let's return to the feeling that the psoas and the diaphragm work together, that there's breath here. As if your psoas muscles could do the breathing. Melt into the pelvic bowl. Melt the shoulders. Let your whole body weight drop. Focus on the exhales, getting a bit longer. As you're ready, let's begin to bring our awareness back to the space around us. You can begin to have some movement in the body. Onto your side. Come up to sit as you're ready. Take a deep, slow breath. Let's just offer the energy that we cultivate, the presence that we cultivate in our practice outward to share. Namaste. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.